Democrats can't say they weren't warned. In fact, the three pollsters here this morning did exactly that. They said the Democrats' own agenda would hurt them in the upcoming midterm elections. But the chief pollster at the White House, Joel Benenson, assured everyone the threat isn't something to be concerned with. Here's what he said. Let's quote him. The Republican Party's standing is at one of its lowest points ever, and its competitive position versus the Democrats looks much as if it did in the summer of 1998 and 2002, neither of which were wave elections. So which side is right? We invited Mr. Benenson on the program, but he did not respond. We're joined by the pollsters who were called out specifically: Doug Schoen, Scott Rasmussen, Pat Caddell. Scott and Doug co-authored a new book that's out now, Tea Party. It's called On the Tea Party, titled Mad as Hell, due out next month. Scott has not taken part in that. More on that story later. All right, first off, Doug, who was right?
Well, I think it's pretty obvious that
you were right.
Pat and Scott and I were. Pat and I wrote a number of articles saying health care would be a disaster. Benenson said health care would be a net plus. It's 60% want repeal, about 30% want to keep it. We said the agenda was a failure. It's proving to be a failure. I think we were pretty clear that we were right and correct.
Pat, I read a poll this morning that most people under 40 don't even know that health care passed.
Oh, let me tell you that thing this morning. But this goes to this point. There you had Stan Greenberg, who with Benenson went up after our article to the Hill, put all the Democrats in the caucus, all these people they forced to walk the plank, told them that, oh, they don't know what they're doing. People love health, they're going to love it once it passed. What are we at today? 60% of your poll for repeal?
That's right.
This, the country basically, as we said, they viewed it as a crime against democracy, and they want this thing expunged, and it's going to eventually
You agree, Scott? Is that what you're reading?
Absolutely. I mean, what happened right from the start, the president was elected by campaigning like Ronald Reagan. He talked about tax cuts for 95% of Americans. When the stimulus bill was first proposed and debated in Congress, they treated tax cuts like they were a concession to Republicans, as a compromise. Right from the start, the economy has been dragging down the president's numbers, and the response has been making things worse.
Fox News poll, Scott, no offense. We're going to tell you what it is, okay? You didn't do this one. Do you approve or disapprove of the Obama administration's policies? Approve 48%, disapprove 47%, 5%. Very small, don't know yet.
That's on his overall policies. And what we find consistently right now, there's a split between who do you blame more for the economic problems, George Bush or Barack Obama. What voters are doing this election cycle is the same thing they did in the last two cycles. They're voting against the party in power. It's not that people have all of a sudden fallen in love with Republicans.
Boy, that's for sure.
They're just unhappy with both political parties.
I want to be very clear. Pat Caddell and I, not Scott, are Democrats. We consider ourselves in the Democratic mainstream. We believe this president and his policies are not reflective of the will of the American people, and that the Democrats are suffering as a result.
I think one thing is historic, and I'll defer to you if you don't agree, but when you have three major passes of legislation and you can't talk about any of them in the midterms, makes no sense.
But you can't talk about any of them in midterms. You have them now out on health care. The story you had this morning saying, oh, by the way, you can't mention because it doesn't work anymore, spending money. Your people, this kind of thing, and the numbers with likely voters are getting worse.
Stay here, all three of you. That's a demand. It's not a request. I'm making you stay. Our panel sticks around for this. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi wants an investigation into people who opposed the Ground Zero Mosque. Is she talking about Democrats Harry Reid and Howard Dean, I ask you rhetorically?
There is no question that there is a concerted effort to make this a political issue by some, and I join those who have called for looking into how is this opposition to the mosque being funded.
Well, some of those opposed to the mosque plans include your colleagues, Harry Reid and Howard Dean. Who's funding them? Should we have an investigation? We're back with our panel, going by the names of Pat, Doug, and Scott. All right, first with you. What kind of statement is that? Is that choreographed? Is there something behind there I can't see?
It may be choreographed, Brian, but it's ridiculous. To investigate the funding of domestic political oppositions and ignore the funding of overseas proponents, advocates, and supporters of a mosque near Ground Zero is Orwellian politics at its best, or probably worse.
It's San Francisco politics.
But she also walked it back by saying, I still want to find out how they're going to fund it.
Let me tell you, this is so ridiculous. The numbers on this thing, Scott had some of the first numbers on this. This is the most, never have I seen since Obama's been president, issue of controversy where everyone is united against the position, and the Democrats are headed in the valley of the Little Bighorn on this.
Right, and Scott, 70% of the country roughly is against the building. I think it's tasteless to put it 200 yards from the World Trade Center. What's the speaker thinking?
I don't know what the speaker is thinking. I don't know what the president was speaking when he brought it up to make it a national issue. This is the kind of emotional issue that can translate the economic numbers into political action. The economy is still the driving force, but this touches a chord.
4 major Republicans like Ed Gillespie and Michael Gerson said easy. Bush guys who say Republicans, don't go over the top with your rhetoric regarding this mosque. What's behind that?
They don't have, well, they don't have, because they're being, the effort to demonize them and say, oh, they're wacky. The fact is, they don't have to demonize it. Everybody's with them. It's the Democrats who are moving on this. And you know, I think that it's going to be a problem. And you're right about one thing, Scott. This reminds me of, no, it's like the Iranian hostage crisis in 80. It is a lead right into the economy. It just adds more to it. It's a trigger right into the economy.
The Republicans want to avoid getting sidetracked on this away from their big issue.
A guy that used to work with you now works for Barack Obama directly, Joe Benenson, a pollster, called you and you out about your credibility. Well, look into that camera and tell Joe Benenson.
Joe Benenson, let me tell you something. I've never met you, but I want you to come with me on this show, just you and I, mano a mano, and let's find out so people can see who knows something about polling. And presidential polling particularly. So if you want to make all these statements you make, come do them here, do them in my face, and we'll get into it right here.
Brian, Joel worked for me for about 7-8 years. I urge him to come on Fox and Friends, debate my friend and colleague Pat Caddell. It'll be great TV, and the administration might learn something from the exchange.
Scott just hit a flash bonus, head 9 out of 10 watching. Want to see that debate happen?
Yes,
I'll watch.
Scott, Pat, and Doug, always great having you on.
Thanks.
Dynamic conversation. You talk about dynamic people. Let's go out to 2 of them right now.